这是一个实验性频道的节目，记录自我学习的事物。欢迎收听，我也是手札。
All right, everyone, get ready, because today we're diving deep into something pretty serious: divorce laws. With the Republicans winning the recent U.S. election, there's a lot of concern, especially from women's rights groups, about potential impacts on no-fault divorce.
Yeah, it's been a key part of the legal system for over 50 years, so any changes would be a huge deal.
Exactly. And get this, at the same time, Taiwan is going through its own major overhaul of divorce laws. It's a total system revamp.
It really makes you wonder if something's prompting these parallel but separate journeys in family law on opposite sides of the globe.
It's like an unexpected East meets West situation,
Yeah.
with both regions trying to figure out what divorce should look like in the 21st century. So in this deep dive, we're going to unpack the legal changes in both countries and what they mean for individuals and families. Just from that, what stands out to you?
The contrasting approaches are pretty striking. In the U.S., we're seeing anxiety about potential rollbacks, almost like a step backward. But Taiwan is pushing forward with what they're calling a modernization of their divorce laws.
It's almost like they're looking ahead while the U.S. is stuck in this back and forth with its past.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's start with the U.S. and this whole no-fault divorce debate. Jill Filipovich, a well-known feminist writer, has a really insightful opinion piece in CNN. She lays out the concerns some people have about potentially losing no-fault divorce, especially in a post-Roe v. Wade America.
Yeah, Filipovich's background definitely lends weight to this discussion. And with CNN, her views reach a broad audience, making this a piece worth paying attention to.
Absolutely. And she doesn't hold back. She asks, should married couples be forced by law to stay together even if one of them wants to leave? It really gets you thinking, right?
For sure. It highlights that core issue of individual autonomy within a marriage. She is essentially arguing that people should have the right to choose whether or not to stay married, regardless of fault.
And to really get that argument, we need some historical context. Before the 1960s, most states in the U.S. had a fault-based divorce system. You had to prove your spouse did something wrong, like adultery or abandonment, just to get a divorce.
It's pretty wild to think about that now. That system basically trapped people, especially women, in unhappy or even abusive marriages because they couldn't meet those strict fault-based requirements for divorce.
And that's exactly what Filipovich is worried about. She argues that without no-fault divorce, we could go back to a time when women were basically stuck in marriages, often facing serious financial and social consequences.
Her concerns are definitely valid. If you look at the research, a study by the National Bureau of Economic Research found that introducing no-fault divorce actually led to a big decrease in domestic violence and female suicide rates. That's a pretty powerful statement about how much of an impact this legal shift had.
Wow, I didn't realize the impact was that significant. But it's not all smooth sailing for those in favor of no-fault divorce, right? Filipovich brings up this comment by J.D. Vance, the Republican senator, about people changing spouses like they change their underwear.
Yeah, that comment really stirred things up. It fueled anxieties, even though Vance hasn't actually proposed any concrete policy changes on divorce. But it shows how powerful even offhand remarks from influential figures can be, particularly in a charged political climate.
It's like his words tapped into this underlying fear that divorce has become too easy, which feeds into those concerns about potential rollbacks. So, legally speaking, is there a real push to get rid of no-fault divorce?
Well, Kimberly Creasy's article shed some light on that. She reports that there isn't a national effort to repeal no-fault divorce, but some conservative state GOP platforms are calling for its removal. She specifically mentions Texas and Nebraska.
So even if it's not a nationwide thing, the state you live in could potentially become a battleground for this issue.
Yeah, it's like a patchwork of different legal realities across the country.
It's almost like a hidden layer of complexity beneath this already complex topic. So you have this tension brewing in the U.S. about the future of no-fault divorce. But then there's Taiwan taking a totally different approach.
Right, a complete 180. While the U.S. grapples with potential restrictions, Taiwan is moving towards expanding access to divorce, and it's all stemming from a recent ruling from their constitutional court.
This is where things start getting a bit confusing for me. They're making it easier to get divorced in Taiwan. What's the reasoning behind that, and what exactly are they changing?
That's where things get really interesting. So Taiwan's constitutional court basically ruled that barring at-fault spouses from seeking a divorce violates the fundamental right to freedom of marriage, no matter the circumstances. It's a really fascinating perspective, seeing the ability to end a marriage as, like, integral to the freedom to enter one in the first place.
That's such a different way of thinking about it. Like, you can't truly have the freedom to choose unless you also have the freedom to change your mind later on.
Exactly. And so this ruling is driving these massive legal revisions aimed at modernizing Taiwan's divorce laws. It's a pretty bold step, and it really shows their commitment to individual autonomy.
So it's not just about making divorce easier on the surface, but more about aligning their legal system with a bigger philosophical shift in how they view marriage and individual rights.
You got it. But you can imagine this raises some concerns. If you're making divorce more accessible, then how do you make sure you're protecting the more vulnerable spouse, especially those who might be financially dependent?
That's the big question, right? You don't want to swing the pendulum so far towards individual freedom that you leave people in tough situations. It's like walking a tightrope.
For sure. And that's where Taiwan's approach gets really interesting. They're broadening the grounds for divorce, for example, allowing couples separated for 3 of the past 5 years to file. But at the same time, they're introducing measures specifically designed to protect the financially weaker spouse.
Okay, now you've got my attention. What kind of measures? This is where it gets really interesting for me.
Well, one that really stands out is this concept of compensating a spouse for career sacrifices made during the marriage. So let's say you have a stay-at-home parent who dedicated years to raising children and maybe put their own career on hold. Taiwan's proposed changes would recognize that contribution and include it in financial considerations during a divorce.
So it's not just looking at who earned what during the marriage, but also acknowledging that unpaid contributions like childcare or homemaking have real value and can impact earning potential down the line.
Exactly. And this actually aligns with the broader trend we're seeing in some countries that have moved away from fault-based divorce. Torio actually points to Switzerland as an example, a country that's undergone similar reforms. They also emphasize financial protections for the spouse who may have been economically disadvantaged during the marriage.
It's like they're trying to create a fairer system that reflects the economic reality of modern partnerships, where contributions go beyond just bringing home a paycheck. But isn't that kind of a slippery slope? Like, how do you even define what a career sacrifice is? And couldn't this lead to endless disputes and arguments?
That's definitely a valid concern, and I'm sure those specifics will get sorted out as these laws are actually put into practice. The idea, though, is that the courts would have the power to consider these factors on a case-by-case basis, using evidence like previous earning history or education level and the specific circumstances of the marriage.
So it sounds like they're trying to strike a balance between individual freedom and also recognizing that marriage is an economic partnership as well. And by doing that, they're hopefully minimizing the chances of one spouse being left, struggling financially.
Precisely. But it's not just about preventing financial hardship. It's also about recognizing the value of those non-monetary contributions to a marriage. The goal is to level the playing field and make sure that both parties have a fair chance to rebuild their lives after the divorce.
That's a pretty significant shift in perspective, right? It challenges that traditional idea that financial contributions are the only ones that matter.
Totally. It's a move towards a more well-rounded view of what counts as a contribution to a marriage. And it raises a really fascinating question. What are the effects of this shift? Both positive and negative, of course.
That's what I'm wondering, too. On the one hand, it seems like a step towards more fairness, especially for women who often take on most of the caregiving responsibilities. But could it also accidentally create new problems or unintended consequences?
Well, one potential concern is that it might unintentionally reinforce traditional gender roles. Like, if staying at home to parent is mainly seen as a woman's sacrifice, it could discourage men from taking on that role and discourage women from going for those more ambitious careers. It's kind of a double-edged sword.
Oh, that's such a good point. It's like they're trying to fix one problem, but they could end up creating a new one. It just goes to show how complicated this whole issue is. There are no easy answers.
Nope. No easy answers at all. And it goes beyond just gender roles, too. There's also the question of how this might impact the dynamics within a marriage. Like, if you know you'll be compensated for career sacrifices, will that change how you make decisions as a couple?
Wow, you're really making me think. It's like we're peeling back all these layers of complexity. And with all this talk about Taiwan's new approach to divorce, we haven't even touched on alimony in the U.S. context.
You're right. We kind of skipped over that. And it's a really important piece of the puzzle, especially with all this worry about no-fault divorce. Filipovich's article actually highlights some of the heated rhetoric surrounding alimony in the U.S.
Okay, let's get into that then. What's the connection between no-fault divorce and alimony in the U.S.? And how is it different from what we're seeing in Taiwan?
One major criticism of no-fault divorce, especially from conservative commentators like Steven Crowder and Matt Walsh, is that it supposedly gives women this unfair financial advantage in divorce settlements. They argue that men are often stuck paying alimony even if they didn't want the divorce in the first place.
It's like they see no-fault divorce as a win-lose situation where women benefit and men lose out.
Exactly. And that narrative really feeds into a lot of anxieties about changing gender roles and power dynamics in society. But the question is that actually how alimony works in the U.S.?
Yeah, good question. Do women always get alimony in no-fault divorce cases? Are there specific things that determine if alimony is even granted and who pays?
Well, it's not that straightforward. It's not as simple as no-fault divorce means automatic alimony for women.
So let's break that down. What do courts look at when they're deciding on alimony in the U.S., and how does that actually play out in real-life situations?
In a lot of states, alimony is based on need and the ability to pay. So courts consider things like how long the marriage was, each spouse's earning capacity, their age, health, and their contributions to the household.
So it's not just about who makes more money, but also about who might be in a more vulnerable position financially after the divorce. And that's regardless of gender.
Exactly. And that's a really important point because the way people talk about alimony often ignores these details. It's not about punishing men or rewarding women. It's about trying to make things fair financially in a situation that's always messy and complicated.
And I bet it's emotionally charged too. It's not just numbers, it's about real people and their ability to move on after a major life change.
You're absolutely right. And that brings us back to that big question. How do we create legal systems that balance individual autonomy with fairness and compassion?
It's like we're putting together a puzzle, but the pieces are from different countries and legal systems, and we've seen that each approach has its own strengths and weaknesses.
Exactly. And there aren't always clear-cut answers. But by looking at these different perspectives, we can hopefully gain a deeper understanding of just how complex divorce is, how marriage is changing, and the challenges of balancing individual rights with what society needs.
That's like we're on this big global expedition comparing notes, trying to figure out how to navigate these new and uncharted waters.
Well put. And in the final part of our deep dive, we'll keep exploring this. We'll look at what could happen because of these different approaches to divorce, the good and the bad.
I'm hooked already. This deep dive has really opened my eyes to how global this issue is. It's not just a legal debate. It shows how societies all over are dealing with these fundamental questions about marriage, family, and individual freedom.
And we'll be right back to unpack even more.
So we've talked about the worries in the U.S. about potential changes to no-fault divorce, and then Taiwan's completely different approach with their big legal overhauls, like two separate worlds. But what happens after these laws actually go into effect? What could be the long-term effects on families and on society in general?
That's the question, isn't it? It's like a huge social experiment, and we don't have all the answers. But we can look at research and historical trends to make some educated guesses. Some argue that making divorce easier weakens the idea of marriage and makes people less committed.
That's the slippery slope argument, right? Like, if it's too easy to get divorced, people won't try to work things out, and marriage will lose its meaning.
Exactly. But on the other hand, some people say that making divorce harder doesn't necessarily mean stronger or happier marriages. It might just keep people trapped in relationships that are unhealthy or even abusive. Remember that study we mentioned from the National Bureau of Economic Research? It showed that after no-fault divorce was introduced, domestic violence and female suicide rates went down. That adds a whole new dimension to this discussion.
Right, that study really changes things. It's not just about theoretical arguments about the sanctity of marriage. It's about what actually happens to people and families. So maybe instead of trying to prevent divorce at all costs, we should focus on creating support systems that help people go through divorce in a healthy way, no matter what the laws are.
I think that's a really important point, and that's where Taiwan's approach is interesting. Remember how they're emphasizing mediation and encouraging couples to find solutions they both agree on, even in cases where one person is at fault. That could help reduce conflict and make things more amicable, especially when there are children involved.
Because let's face it, divorce is rarely simple, especially when you have kids. The relationship between the parents might end, but the family continues in a new form. So if you can minimize conflict during the divorce process, it could create a healthier foundation for those relationships after the divorce.
Exactly. And Primfully highlights that exact point. They argue that reducing conflict between parents going through a divorce is crucial for kids to maintain healthy relationships with both parents. It's about recognizing that even though the legal marriage ends, the parental relationships don't. And those relationships need attention and care.
It's like a whole new way of thinking, right? Instead of seeing divorce as a failure, we can see it as a transition, a change in how the family works. And maybe the role of the law isn't to prevent that transition, but to provide a structure so it can happen in a way that minimizes harm and prioritizes everyone's well-being, especially the children.
You've got it. It's about creating legal systems that understand the complexities of modern families and put the best interests of children first, even during separation and divorce. And this brings us back to the global picture. We're seeing these discussions about divorce all over the world with different cultures and societies all dealing with similar issues.
It's like we're all part of this massive experiment, trying to figure out how to adapt to changing social norms, new family structures, and this growing emphasis on individual choice. It's both exciting and a little overwhelming at the same time. But before we get too lost in it all, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive.
Yes, let's sum it all up. What are the main takeaways from our exploration of divorce laws in the U.S. and Taiwan? What should our listeners be thinking about as they go about their day?
Well, the first thing is that there's no one solution that fits every situation. The right approach to divorce laws will depend on things like cultural values, what's considered normal in society, and the particular challenges each country faces.
Absolutely. It's not just about the laws themselves, but also the values and beliefs behind them. Are we putting individual freedom above everything else? Or are we trying to find a balance between individual rights and what's seen as good for society as a whole?
Those are the tough questions, aren't they? And there are no easy answers. But by looking at these different viewpoints, by comparing and contrasting approaches from different places around the world, we can hopefully start to understand marriage, divorce, and the complexities of human relationships in a more nuanced and compassionate way.
Well said. And I think that's really what this deep dive has been all about. It's about encouraging people to think critically, to question their assumptions, and to realize that there's always more to learn, more to discover, more to understand.
So if you're feeling a bit overwhelmed by all this information, that's totally understandable. The important thing is to keep asking questions, keep learning, and keep the conversation going. Because these are issues that affect all of us in one way or another.
And as societies keep changing, as technology keeps reshaping our relationships, and as our ideas about marriage and family continue to evolve, these conversations are only going to become more important. So stay curious, stay engaged, and keep exploring.
That's a perfect way to end it. Until next time, happy diving, everyone.